Good evening. My name is Jessica Rockhold, and I am the Executive Director of Midwest Center for Holocaust Education. And it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to this presentation in the Auschwitz Speaker Series. We are going to be operating in a webinar format tonight, so please utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions of our presenter. We'll be joined at the end by MCHE's historian, Dr. Shelley Klein, who will moderate those questions at the end of our presentation. What we know about medical professionals and medical ethics in the Holocaust is that they were deeply intertwined in the idea of a racial state. Doctors and medical professionals in Nazi Germany played a critical role from the earliest years in the 1930s, where they were responsible for implementing and even conceptualizing, in some cases, policies around positive and negative eugenics. And their role evolved, as did the rest of Nazi policy, where they became the doctors who stood on the ramp in a place like Auschwitz, deciding whether somebody was being sent directly to their death or being used as forced laborers until their death. We also know that there was much experimentation done in the camps on Jewish and non-Jewish prisoners alike, often in the service of war aims. Experiments such as high altitude experiments and exposure to temperature and to seawater. Tonight's presentation considers these issues through a slightly different lens. Most of our speaker series looks at the history of the Holocaust. Tonight, we're looking at the issue of medical professionals from the standpoint of modern day impact. What do these events and what does this history teach us about how medical ethics work in our world today? So it's a critical and an interesting dialogue that brings us from history to the present. I would like to take a moment to share with you how incredible this partnership has been. Our partners at Union Station, Kansas City, had the vision not only to bring the exhibit Auschwitz not long ago, not far away, to our community, but they had the vision to understand the importance of these conversations and these presentations as a wraparound to that exhibit, where we could explore these issues in depth and have meaningful dialogue in our community. So they have been the most amazing partners, and we appreciate them bringing us into this project. And with that, it is really my pleasure to introduce George Costello, who is the president and CEO of Union Station, Kansas City.
Thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate the opportunity to introduce today's presenter. We have had a very unique and rewarding journey with the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education over the last several months, as we have presented this exhibition that has now drawn over 250,000 individuals to see this exhibition, and thousands of individuals that have watched these in-depth presentations. Together with Midwest Center for Holocaust Education, I truly believe we're making systemic change in our community, that we're able to tell the story. And when you see the faces and the comments that we were receiving, I'm confident that what Midwest Center for Holocaust Education has done in our community well over 25 years will now continue on, and that we will ensure that we will be able to say someday that not long ago, not far away, was long ago and far away. And this is our opportunity. Another great partner that we've had the chance to work with is with KCU. We have had a chance to partner with them on our programs for Bodies Revealed. They're a vitally important part of our educational efforts. And we want to welcome everyone to this presentation tied to our current exhibition. And also, we have had numbers of presentations on our part from speaker series that we've done by the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education. And most importantly, many more to come. We're not done. We have many stories that we need to tell, and we must reach every ounce of our community. It's important for us to also acknowledge, as I said, our relationship with Kansas City University of Medicine and Bioscience, and Dr. Mark Hahn. When we wanted to discuss this very difficult topic, we reached out to Dr. Hahn. And of course, as always, he reached out with his hand and we were able to cross the street together to tell this important story and really to make this community think about what we do today and always. Now it's my great pleasure to share with you our speaker, our presenter tonight. I can't even read his vitae. It is so deep, and I was blown away by looking at all the things that he has done in our community. But for Dr. Sommers, among a long list of his professional accomplishments and affiliations, Reverend Dr. Sommers has been the Director of Spiritual Services at Children's Mercy, Kansas City, since 1987. This morning, I spent the entire morning at Ronald McDonald House, and I had a chance to walk the complex and see the children and the families, to see the experience that they're having and the life-changing care that they're receiving at Children's Mercy. He is also Assistant Director of Bioethics Policy and Practice and co-chair of Children's Mercy's Institutional Review Board. Dr. Sommers is also currently serves as an adjunct professor of bioethics at Kansas City University of Medicine, Bioscience, teaching core classes in clinical ethics, pediatric ethics, and theology, as well as his frequent lectures on ethical, theological, and spiritual issues of working with hospitalized children, and has been a lifelong advocate for the respect, dignity of all people, and a voice of religious diversity and tolerance. How fortunate we are to be able to learn this evening from Dr. Sommers. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you Dr. Sommers. Doctor?
Thank you so much for that flattering introduction. And I actually have to begin with a little bit of a change to that, in that this is a very special night for me, because yesterday I stepped down, or as some people say, retired from my position as the Director of Spiritual Services at Children's Mercy Hospital. I will continue on for a short period of time as one of the two chairs of the Institutional Review Board and continue that work with the Research Institute at Children's Mercy. And it's exciting to be here. It's exciting to have this event on the day after I finished that part of my career. If you're a hockey fan, I have gotten to this point in my life, and I've said I'm starting the third half of my life actually today as I come before you. And I want to thank everyone who has been part of this invitation, the generous and wonderful people from the Center for the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education, the people at Union Station. I have been able to go to the exhibit twice. I want to thank my colleagues at Kansas City University, and especially my colleagues at Children's Mercy Hospital. Many of them are joining us tonight here. And I think you touched on this, George, that I'm a minister. There is a big part of me that's a preacher. And so one of the things that I like to do when I talk is to show pictures. And I'm going to pull up my screen now to keep that on track, keep us on track tonight as we really look at the overlay between what happened during the Holocaust, the human experimentation that occurred, and what's going on right now in the world of research. There's an important overlay there. And we're going to go dip down and look at a lot of the images from the Holocaust. I've actually moderated those, so we're not going to actually see some of the atrocious things that were done. But I want to begin, just simply allowing all of us to hear that story. And let me share my screen with you here as we begin. And again, I'm very honored. One of the things as I begin, I want to say that I want to share this in honor of my brother Jay, who was the first philosopher in my life. He was a few years older than me, and he actually sought and completed a degree in philosophy, and he's always taught me the importance of finding the truth in all things. So again, real quickly, I am a religious leader, a theologian, an ethicist, a research ethicist. I am an IRB member, and I am an IRB co-chair, a chair. It's an interesting twist on things that I, as the hospital chaplain, would move into the realm of not necessarily just being an IRB member, but being the chair of an IRB, because usually it's someone who's a physician or a psychologist, psychiatrist who might be the chair, and to have someone who's a non-scientist in that role says a lot about Children's Mercy and their mission to put patients, children, families ahead in all things. And as I worked on this, I wanted to create kind of a way, a ladder actually of walking through these issues. And I realized it was my own lived experience that is important to share, our lived experience as we go through this. So to remember, to lament, to struggle, to hope, and to commit. I am hoping that all of us today will be able to follow through with this and do some of each of these as we walk slowly and carefully together. I'd also want to begin by saying I probably don't have anything new. There's nothing new here tonight. There are esteemed scholars who are part of this Speakers Bureau who have given their life to research and looking at the things that occurred in the concentration camps in Auschwitz and Dachau. And I doubt if I'm bringing anything new related to that story, but I hope I can make the connection between what happened in Auschwitz, again, to what is going on in modern research today, and the cautions that we have, the hope that we have with all of that. So I want to begin actually with a pause. I begin with a pause because as I was back in seminary the first time, as I say it, one of my mentors who took me under his wing to teach me a little bit about preaching said probably a cardinal rule as someone who stands up in front of people is always hesitate before you mention the Holocaust. I have to hesitate. And I would hope we would all hesitate. And then we would move forward softly and gently and purposefully. For me, it's a time of deep reverence that generates within myself a silent pause. And then we proceed. I remember, I believe we all remember. Remember is a verb, an awareness of someone or something in the past, to call to mind, literally to remember, as I would say, to bring someone from the past into the present. We remember tonight. And I share this from the Tanakh, a psalm about real people and real lives. As a heart, as a deer cries longingly for rivulets of water, so does my soul cry longingly to you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When will I come and appear before God? These things I will remember, and I will pour out my soul because of the pain which is upon me. How I passed on with the throng. I walked slowly with them into the house of God with a joyful shouting and thanksgiving, a celebrating multitude. Why are you downcast, O my soul, and why do you stir within me? Hope in God, for I will yet thank him for the salvations of his presence. Real people, real lives, people with values, people with beliefs, people with love, people with goals, and of course, great service. So we see these pictures, and again, the intentionality tonight is to simply look at the faces of people, maybe to look at this particular picture and find one face who's looking out right at you, someone with whom you connect. Is there a similar story between these people and our lived experience before they were incarcerated, before they died? Do we know their names? Do we know what they did for a living? Do we even know what their course was as they arrived at Auschwitz and the end that was there for them? Some dying, some eventually being free. Is there a particular person who maybe looks at us and touches our soul? This is a woman in Auschwitz, obviously, and some of you may know more about her than I. And we don't know her name. I don't know her name, but she's referred to in many different places as the smile. It's important for us also as we gather here to remember what a woman who is a 97-year-old park ranger said. What gets remembered is determined by who's in the room doing the remembering. And I'm so proud to be part of this group as we come together to remember. We lament. I was fortunate to go through the exhibit twice. The first time it felt rather hurried. I wanted to make sure I could see everything in the time allotted by my group that was there. And the second time I was able to take more time, and it was amazing to be with that group of people that was simply silent. So unusual for our world today. And it felt to me as though there was a lot of lament there. Lament, a verb, a passionate and unresolving expression of grief, regret, mourning, a public confession of sorrow. And again, I take the voice of someone from the Hebrew Scriptures who was caught up in some kind of situation that was impacting their health here. Hear my prayer, Lord. Let me cry for help. Let my cry for help come to you. Do not hide your face from me when I'm in distress. Turn your ear to me. When I call, answer me quickly. For my days vanish like smoke. My bones burn like glowing embers. My heart is blighted and withered like grass. I forget to eat my food. In my distress, I groan aloud and am reduced to skin and bones. I'm like a desert owl, like an owl among the ruins. I lie awake. I have become like a bird alone on a roof. All day long, my enemies taunt me. Those who rail against me use my name as a curse. For I eat ashes as my food and mingle my drink with tears because of your great wrath. You've taken me up and thrown me aside. My days are like the evening shadow. I wither like grass. I believe all of us lament and feel the sorrow of this great loss. And I think we struggle. I struggle. Struggle, verb, to contend, to experience difficulty and make a great effort in order to do something. A great effort. I struggle with this picture in particular. It's from the Holocaust. Maybe some of you have seen it. As we know from the history of human experimentation and the atrocities that occurred in that, there was an interest in twins. I come from the lineage of twins. My mom was an identical twin. I grew up with two mothers, if you will. Both of them turned 18 in 1940, here in the States, obviously. But they could have been these two young women, not knowing what the future would bring. Treated with disrespect, not allowed to live their essence. I also have two twin grandsons. They'll be 4 in February, and how exciting it is to know that perhaps they'll take the mantle of great effort as we move forward into the next generation. We struggle, don't we? And moving into some of the research elements, I want to share with you that this is my everyday reminder. This is a picture that I have, a paper version of it. And it's on the wall of my old office that I left yesterday, and it's on the wall of my new office at Children's Mercy. It's a reminder of the horror that came at the hands of humans. And in particular, I look at this shoe and remind myself always of how vulnerable all people are, but especially children. 1.5 million children died during the Holocaust, a fact that just rips my heart to pieces. These are my daily reminders. They cause me to struggle and to work toward that great effort that is needed. And I struggle in a couple of ways in particular. I struggle to find the right parlance. I love the word parlance, my friends, because it's a word that really describes our need to have some sort of perfection in the words that we use, the words that we use in our daily life, in our daily living. I think we struggle to find the right parlance when we talk about these issues related to the atrocities of human experimentation during the Holocaust. And this next slide is kind of confusing here, but it is not what it is. It jumps off the page at me. It is not what it is. Holocaust-related atrocities were not science. They were not medicine. And they definitely were not research. As I would put it, they were crimes of willful human terror and harm with absolutely no redemptive value. it's important to say that these were acts that some might say were the most criminal acts in the course of human history because of their intentionality, because of their deliberation. And they caused harm, they caused death. And we cannot categorize them in any other way. We cannot say that they were science, or that they were medicine, or that they were research. And maybe the best we can say is this phrase that I've already used, that these are the atrocities of human experimentation. I even hesitate to use the word experimentation because of the fact that that might give it some kind of credence in our world. It doesn't. It simply means that there were activities that went on for reasons that some people might call devious, or as I would label, this is another lecture, not tonight, another lecture, but I would label reasons that were evil. So can we match our parlance with the reality that this was not medicine, this was not science, this was not research, and label this for what it was, these atrocities that occurred? One thing that I noted, and this has already been mentioned, and I think it's important that we say this out loud and realize this, that Nazi medicalized killing provide both the method, the gas chamber, and much of the personnel for the death camps themselves. In Auschwitz, for instance, doctors selected prisoners for death, supervised the killings in the gas chambers, and decided when the victims were dead. And as Jessica mentioned, it's more than 350 physicians were involved in these specific criminal acts. And we know the history, I'm sure, if we've looked at this, that between 1939 and 1945, at least 70 human experiments involving cruel and often lethal procedures on human subjects were conducted in the Nazi concentration camps. Again, I've changed the language of this quote to call them human experiments rather than science or research. In one, the experimental group was injected with vaccine for typhus, while the control group was injected with typhus-infected blood. To see the difference. Bones were transplanted from one prisoner to another to evaluate regeneration of nerve and muscle and bone. Prisoners were shot in order to study ballistics. Prisoners were starved to study the physiology of starvation so that they could reduce the number of calories that they gave to the people who were prisoners. Prisoners, again, as it has been mentioned, were submerged in tubs of freezing water till death to evaluate how long a downed pilot could survive in the icy waters of the Atlantic. And prisoners were put in pressure chambers and subjected to lethal extremes of atmospheric pressure to see how that might impact those who would be piloting pressurized jets. This resulted in, as you would all know, humans becoming a means to an end. Humans becoming a means to an end. The end of the Nazi tyranny was, of course, to promote their totalitarian political system, the supremacy of their race, control of countries in their midst. It included testing of medical procedures and pharmaceuticals, to try to promote an advancement in health for those who were of the regime. It was also on the shadow side, confirming the broader paradigm of racial hygiene, that is eugenics and genocide, to confirm Nazi racial ideology and ethnic purity, I would add. So establishing criteria to differentiate inherited disease from acquired disease, using that as a way to blame other groups, Jewish groups, for their inferiority, and of course labeling them as inferior. And this one was new to me, but creating easily available research material. They considered that the people who were imprisoned in the concentration camps were simply individuals who could be used in any way they wanted for their experimentation. Humans became a means to an end, and I want to stay with that for a minute. The totalitarian political system and program of racial hygiene reinforced each other and contributed to specific questions to be addressed by the medical sciences, in which no ethical or legal regulations existed. There was nothing there to stop them from utilizing the people who were in the concentration camps in these harmful ways. And these criminal actions ignored the well-being of those involved in experimentation. The people who were the subjects in these horrendous experiments had no say. And that's an important theme as we move forward. About a third of the victims died, we've learned. And of course, the surviving victims had irreversible physical damage and severe psychological trauma that stayed with them for the rest of their lives. We rely on the many faces of Immanuel Kant, who lived during the 18th and 19th century, barely into the 19th century, to give us an exacting ability to name this offense. I'm sure that there are people here with us tonight who know more about Kant than I do. I did study him quite a bit in college, and became a bit of an aficionado of Kant. I can remember my professor telling me the story, and it's interesting that there's some similarities between my professor and Kant, and maybe even with me a little bit, but told the story that Kant was so, I guess we would call him OCD in our lives today, but so aware of the mechanisms of the universe that as he made his walk through town every day at exactly the same time, all the shopkeepers and even the clockmakers and watchmakers would set their timepieces by when he walked by their door. Kant had an understanding of the universe as the source of great understanding and knowledge. And he really did believe that in existence itself, there was a way to discern the difference between right and wrong, good and bad. He believed, for example, that the existence itself gives us the maxim that we should always tell the truth. And within existence itself, Kant would say that humans must never be treated as a means. You really can't take advantage of people, is what he would suggest. And there's been a lot of splitting of hairs in terms of what does that mean? You know, when you call I don't know if Kant ever did this, if Kant ever called Uber or Lyft and you have someone come and the only reason why you want them to come is to take you home after a long night on the town, and you give them money. Is that legitimate or not? You are definitely using that person as a means. There's been a lot of discussion about that, but I think he wanted us to dig deeper and to understand, as it says, some Kantians hold that far more important than understanding his position on treating persons merely as a mean is understanding Kant's account of treating persons as ends in themselves. And as I would describe that is, in using my own language, is to respect and enable and advocate for every person to be able to live out the existence and essence that they have in their life. And that end that we have, that we create for every person, must reflect goodwill. It must reflect this almost an ideal that enables people to, again, live and pursue the essence of their values, their beliefs, their dreams, their visions. So we come up with two statements here, two sides of a coin. All humans must be an end in and of themselves, is the way Kant would say it. That we recognize that essence in everyone. But we would also say, and it's easier for me to say this, that no person should ever become the means to an end. Never a means to an end. And of course, as we look at the Holocaust and look at this, we hear Kant's own words that we act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person, a personalized element of this, or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end, that essence that is there. It's interesting that Martin Luther King, a saint of mine, of course, captures this and really puts it in perspective in relationship to the Holocaust. When he said, in the final analysis, means and ends must cohere because the end is pre-existent in the means, and ultimately destructive means cannot bring about constructive ends. Again, this is a reason to make us pause and wonder out loud about the issue of the intent of the Nazis and the harm that they did to so many people, the evil that was there. So legal action was taken at Nuremberg. We all know that, and that's part of the history. And it's a platform for us. It's a marker in history that we look at. The Nuremberg Trial itself, 24 Nazis and bureaucrats were placed on trial, 19 convicted of war crimes, 12 were sentenced to death. Less known is the Nuremberg Doctors' Trial. 20 of the 23 defendants were physicians, 16 were found guilty, 7 were acquitted, 7 were executed. And some of the language that goes along with the doctor's trial was that this all came about because they performed medical experiments without the subject's consent on prisoners of war and civilians of occupied countries, in the course of which experiments the defendants committed murders, brutalities, cruelties, tortures, atrocities, that word, and other inhumane acts. Also planning and performing the mass murder of prisoners of war and civilians of occupied countries, stigmatized as aged, insane, incurably ill, deformed, and so on by gas lethal injections. and diverse other means in nursing homes, hospitals, and asylums during the euthanasia program and participating in the mass murder of concentration camp inmates. Remember, most of them were doctors, physicians. This is taken from the trial. It says, the wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated. When we remember, when we lament, and when we struggle with this, we right the wrong, I believe. We right the wrong. And that's where I think the element of hope comes alive for us. Hope, verb, expect with confidence, cherish a desire with anticipation. And I would add, from my perspective as a theologian, hope truly means empowerment. Hope is built upon these principles that all humans have equal value, all humans are sacred, all humans must be treated with respect and dignity. And we remember that as we look at some important dates here. The Nuremberg Trials lasted from November of 1945 till October of 46, came to a close with sentencing, execution of 10 defendants in October of 46. The Nuremberg Doctor Trials ran then after that from October of 46 to August of 47 and ended with the execution of 7 defendants, all of whom were doctors, in June of 1948. The hope comes in understanding the history itself, that simultaneously, while these trials were going on, while justice was being sorted out, there was a growing awareness of harm in human experimentation. Growing awareness of the harm of eugenics, forced sterilization. Over 3 million people were sterilized during the Nazi totalitarian regime. As we see in the exhibit, there were marriage prohibitions, and of course the whole notion of racial, religious, and ethnic inferiority that was part of this, the ideals. Growing awareness of the impact of totalitarian regimes and the human experimentation that was part of that, that led, of course, to the concentration camps and the mass killings that occurred. And then growing awareness of the harm that occurred in the name of advances of medicine through the atrocities in human experimentation. There were 3 important advancements as we look at this. And this is, again, the platform for modern day research. One was the Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Helsiki, and the Belmont Report. The Nuremberg Code was important because it was the first statement. There were some embryonic kinds of statements actually before World War II, that as people began to think about research. But the whole notion for the first time of looking at some of the concepts such as voluntary consent and understanding how none of those concepts were being utilized in any of this experimentation that was going on by the Nazis. One of the important things is that the US judges who presided over the proceedings did not intend the code to apply only to the case before them to be a response to the atrocities committed by the Nazi physicians, or to be inapplicable to research as in customarily carried out in medical institutions, but they really suggested that they wrote the code for the practice of human experimentation whenever it was being conducted. So there's this move from the particular, which could be an individual, a community, an institution, a nation, to the broader appeal of the universality of the need for human subjects protection. The Nuremberg Code had 10 important elements to it. Voluntary consent is essential. The results of any experiment must be for the greater good of society. There must be animal testing ahead of time. Experiments should be conducted by avoiding physical, mental suffering and injury. No experiment should be conducted if it is believed to cause death or disability. The risk should never exceed the benefits. Adequate facilities should be used to protect subjects. Experiments should be conducted only by qualified scientists. Subjects should be able to end their participation at any time. And the scientist in charge must be prepared to terminate the experiment when injury, disability, or death is likely to occur. These are actually the foundation of the work of ethics, research ethics in our day today. These are vitally important concepts that impact decision-making of researchers and, again, research ethicists. It's interesting that the Nuremberg Code was never ratified. And one of the nations that blocked it was the United States. And many thought that these international codes were not pertinent to research in the United States. Nonetheless, I think all of us would know that many individuals were harmed in the United States as a result of human experimentation. And here's just a few of these abhorrent human experiments in the United States. One is the monster study that took place at the University of Iowa, which was an induction of stuttering in 22 orphan children, young people who had no problems with speech, who were taken into a situation and so humiliated that it induced stuttering in them. And as a result, they had lifelong struggles. The Skid Row cancer study in the 1950s, where homeless individuals underwent prostate biopsies without consent or awareness of the side effects and had very little follow-up health care. Willowbrook experiment, which was from 1950s to 1970s in New York, cognitively impaired resident children were fed or inoculated with active hepatitis virus, very similar to what happened with the Nazis. And there were inducements to this so that the parents would choose to allow their children to be part of this. And of course, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment that took place, and this is key, from 1930 to 1972 in Alabama, where medical treatment was withheld from poor minority men under the guise of getting treatment. I was in college in 1972. Other abhorrent things were the Fernald experiments, of course, the story of Henrietta Lacks, the Stanford prison study, and more recently, the case of Jesse Gelsinger, a young man who was provided with great inducement to be part of a study to have relief from a genetic metabolical condition, and he died as a result of that treatment. Those are all important for us to remember. The Helsiki Declaration was an add-on to what was done in the Nuremberg Code, and it added the notion that research needed to be based on science, that the subject needed to have a sense of self-determination, that subjects need to make informed decisions, and that they strengthened this notion that research needed to be a benefit to the population. It couldn't be done in a vacuum just for the sake of the scientists or the science that was being done there. Then we have the Belmont Report, which looked at ethics, applications, and external review, those three pieces. And, you know, it was the Belmont Report that came, I believe, I go back in 1977, so some 25 years after the first Nuremberg Code, that looked at that made the statement, the clear statement that basic ethical principles should underlie the conduct of biomedical and behavioral research, and laying out some boundaries between biomedical and behavioral research and the accepted routine practice. One of the important things is to look at what is standard of practice and what part of any research is beyond that, looking at the role of assessment of risk-benefit criteria, developing important guidelines for the selection of human subjects for participation in the research, and the nature and definition of informed consent. Informed consent became more focused during the, as a result of the Belmont Report. This established the application of basic ethical principles in all human subjects research. So respect for persons, that persons should be treated as autonomous agents, and that persons with diminished autonomy are entitled to protection. Beneficence, the strict obligation to respect subjects' decision-making and protect them from harm. And finally, justice, determination of who bears the burdens, and most importantly, who receives the benefits of human subjects research. Is it the subject? Is it the researcher? Is it the institution? Is it the sponsor? Is it the community? Who benefits in that? And it created basic applications of informed consent, you know, the sharing of information, monitoring comprehension. Do subjects actually understand what they're getting into? Determining voluntariness, so listening carefully. Do they really understand? Are they really doing this on a voluntary basis? It's a huge piece in research involving children. Are the children aware of this? Do they have a voice in it? Are they doing this simply because the parents want them to do this? This included assessment of risks and benefits and putting that right before them. So the nature and the scope of risks, assessing the risk-benefit ratio, and again, prohibiting excessive brutal risks. Making sure that there isn't an enormous risk being placed upon this person for minimal benefit. So some updated definitions and protections as we go forward in this. One is that as a result of the Belmont Report and lots of conversations, there's a more precise definition of exactly what research is. And I want to read this because it's important. This research as defined by federal regulations is categorized by its intentions rather than by its level of risk or its innovativeness. Research is any activity that has as its goal the creation of generalizable knowledge. The activities that lead to this goal generally involve systematic collection of data and analysis of data. Something's considered research if there is an intention to publish or share publicly the results of new information that's being gathered by an investigator. Sharing the data publicly is a necessary aspect of making it generalizable. So this whole notion that research has with it, you know, what's the intention here? Why are you gathering this data? And if can you simply gather data for the sake of gathering data? Not so much. Again, adding to generalizable knowledge, intent, a systematic collection of data, which could be numbers, or in my world, it could be narratives, listening to people's stories, recording them, comparing one story to another story, looking for trends, looking for similarities, looking for differences. Demonstration of validity through replication of research methods and defining best practice, all parts of research. So the federal regulations, 45 CFR 46, also as an outgrowth of the Belmont report, made the statement that research must be reviewed by an institutional review board. In the United States, that's what they're called. In Canada, and I'm involved with another IRB that does some review of research in Canada. And in Canada, it's not a IRB or institutional review board, but in Canada, they call it what I wish they would call, which is a research ethics board. It's much simpler. And they simplify it by saying research is collecting information on a living individual about whom an investigator is conducting research and obtains data through intervention or interaction with the individual, and it contains identifiable private information. Not all research that could include elements of humans is required to be reviewed by an institutional review board, by a research ethics board. And that would include de-identified data. It also includes research that is being done on individuals who have already died and who are deceased. It's an important qualifier in some of the work that we do here. So what do IRBs do? Their primary responsibilities, again, thinking back to the ethical pieces that were not present in the experimentation during the Holocaust. One is to look at and review and analyze risk-benefit ratios. If there are two arms of a study, is there equipoise? Is there a balance between the risks of the two arms of the study, and how does that compare to standard of care? To review the scientific merit of a research protocol, to review qualifications of the study team, to review necessary resources or infrastructure. Can the research actually be done? Will subjects be informed of new information if halfway through a study they realize that a pharmaceutical is not working as it was intended, or there's been another development in another study that's been published? Will subjects be informed of that? A big issue for me is what happens to identifiable data or tissues or blood. How long will a researcher be able to hold on to those and utilize those? Who monitors use of de-identified data or tissue that might go into what we call a research library or a repository that's there? And again, I've already said this, but can the research actually be done in all of this? A lot of this is related to risk and benefit. Federal regulations require that the potential risk to research participants must be identified and minimized as much as they possibly can, and to try to protect the subjects who are in that research. Now, one part of this, and this is one of my favorite slides, I pulled this up today and did some cutting and pasting. I chuckle whenever I see this because it's a quadrant of looking at this, and you'll see why I chuckle a little bit about. But you know, if you're on a research ethics committee, you know, you look at a lot of studies and, you know, try to figure out how to compare one study to another and the risks, and to look at this with the one aspect being volume and the other being risk. And so there are some studies out there that are low risk and low volume, a study where they may simply be looking at a small group of patients who have a particular disease process or a genetic issue there, and maybe they're simply taking some tissues from that to study that again might be similar to what a child or an adult would do if they were in their own having their own doctor's office visit. In that low volume, not a lot of people, low risk. If you go up to the left, this whole notion of high volume, low risk, and I always chuckle because we call those SNOT studies, where patients come in, we talk to them, get their consent or get permission from the parent or legally authorized representative, and do some swabbing there. A lot of that has happened related to COVID, although because COVID goes way back into your sinuses, it's a little bit different. But looking at that and trying to get some trends in where in epidemiology of where some of these, where flu might start or the cold might start or respiratory syncytial virus might start in all of that. So high volume, low risk with that. Then you have in the lower right quadrant, you have low volume, high risk. And this would be a lot of the studies where you're looking at first in human studies, where there's a new type of pharmaceutical, maybe a new monoclonal antibody that's being developed to help with cancer treatment that first gets tested for safety in maybe a dozen individuals, first in humans. And these are much higher risk because we don't know the impact of that substance on a human being, and we need to follow that. Again, making sure that those individuals are aware that they are participating in something that is a first in human study. And then you get to the high volume, high risks, which the excitement in research is some of these types of studies where we're using new drugs with activators and potentiators that are able to help to provide relief for diseases such as sickle cell and cystic fibrosis, and even HIV. I've been involved in the HIV community for a long, long time, going way back to the 80s in this, and to know that they are eventually, they're currently coming up with new pharmaceuticals that will, for the first time, actually provide a cure for HIV is just amazing. It's exciting for me to be part of that. So again, the elements of consent that go into this are, enabling, making sure that the subject has understands the research, understands the alternatives, knows that they can withdraw at any time, and that we're minimizing the incentives to this. There are additional pressures that come with this. We're all in some ways a fish in a blender. It's my favorite picture here, a fish in the blender. And it has to do with why we're doing research. Some of it is at Children's Mercy, even now, my mantra is every employee should be involved in research in some way to be able to know exactly what they're doing, and again, to contribute to generalizable knowledge. Understanding that healthcare costs are supported in some certain diagnoses, especially by research endeavors. These new pharmaceuticals are made available under the guise of research. Hospital ratings and recognitions are based on research success and the notoriety of that. Development of repositories and data banks and the development of de-identified data that is available to research are big pieces that need to be monitored. And what comes with the notion that some researchers go into research and may want to take tissue or blood samples with the presumption of consent or permission or assent. Kind of the notion of you say yes until you say no. And then of course profit is a huge piece of this that moves it along. As we get to the end here, I would just pause again to say that this review and looking at the atrocities of human experimentation during the Holocaust, looking at some of the hesitation that was there in the United States, that is in some ways still there at times. And, you know, realizing how important it is that we have in place these intentional connections between research and ethics and maybe even morality, doing the right thing based upon our values. And having that constant vigilance and ethics review must be in place if we're going to sustain research into the next generation. I say with great pride, because I'm involved in this part of research as an IRB chair, as an IRB member on an outside group. I say it with great pride that there are going to be enormous positive strides taken in research just in the next 5 years. Amazing things are on the horizon, some of which are similar to the speed with which we were able to create the COVID-19 immunizations, vaccines, and get them available to the millions of people who are now protected by that. That technology is going to bring health and wholeness to many, many people. And I'm proud of that. That's good. But I think we need to say, let's commit here. In some ways, maybe what we're doing in research, this notion of understanding that something horrendous occurred, and that, again, that simultaneous development of the ethical and moral guidelines to research is something that maybe we see for all of us. Remember, commit, verb, to pledge, or bind to a course, a policy, or an ideal, literally to send together, to be together. And I think in this moment, as we look at this research, you know, we commit to ourselves. That was part of what Kant says. You know, we should always treat ourselves as an ends, not as a means. We commit to each other. We commit to the vulnerable. We commit to our communities. Obviously commit to our nation, and obviously to the world. And I would say even to the forces beyond us. We make that commitment as we learn from these atrocities that occurred. Part of that would be the mantra that we have in healthcare to see something, say something, even when, and I have this picture of Elijah, one of my favorite, even when we're exhausted, even when we feel as though we don't want to confront the problems that are in our world, or we don't want to confront the evils that are there. we see something, we say something, and move forward in that. And in that, I would say, we pledge together never to allow our hope and power to be stopped again. We do that by remembering, by lamenting, by struggling, by finding hope, and by making a commitment. So thank you for your time today. I'm going to stop my sharing and see if Shelley, if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sommers, for that presentation. We have a couple of questions here for you. I wonder if you might speak a little bit to, if you know, during the doctor's trial at Nuremberg, how the physicians that were put on trial tried to explain their actions, especially in regard to, their, oaths that they had taken to do no harm.
They did exactly where I started out. They basically relied on the whole notion that they were scientists and that they were serving, that they were doing things that were a normal part of science and medicine, and that they were serving the greater good in that. The quote that I wrote was actually from the opening of the trial. So I honestly believe that the people who were involved in that, and it's a fascinating read, the people who were involved in especially the doctor's trial were already convinced. They had done the deep thought that needed to be done in order to understand that this was not medicine, this was not science, and obviously it was not research.
I wonder if you could tell us too about, in your work with medical students, how the work of the Holocaust features in providing an example to guide them in their futures as doctors.
That's a great question. Thank you. And I love medical students. I've been teaching at KCU for, I think, over a dozen years. I actually had a great class last night where I'm teaching death and dying, and we actually went to a funeral home and pulled back the curtain to see everything. And it was an amazing experience for my students, and I was so pleased to provide that for it. Medical students have so much on their platter, and there is so much that they need to learn. Anatomy and physiology, notwithstanding, but microbiology and genetics and all of that. I think we have to be intentional, in our teaching medical students, and I would say all students who work in healthcare. Number one, what research is. And then to teach that history that, I gave the brief overview of what happened during the Holocaust, which it's easy to read that because we kind of know the story already. And that for me is always the starting point. When we're going to talk about research, we almost have to start to talk about the atrocities before we can talk about the wonderful advances. I honestly feel blessed that I've been able I've actually been on the IRB at Children's Mercy so long that they don't have records of when I started. So we think it's about 30 years that I've been on the IRB. I've been one of the chairs at Children's Mercy along with my other co-chair, Dr. Doug Swanson. And I've served on that, and then I serve on this other IRB, and I'm blessed to be a part of that, to see these advancements and to see medicine change, and to be able to help people understand what's entailed in research. I've done some research myself, some narrative research, both when I did my doctorate, and then we were fortunate to work with Dr. John Lantos and others, and had a Templeton grant to do a narrative, iterative review of what chaplains do and how they help families. It's just fascinating.
Are there particular, other than that there's just a lot on their plates, are there particular challenges to communicating and teaching this particular type of subject to students?
I don't think there are challenges. I think it's just, I love working with medical students because they're such good students to begin with. And they're so excited about the opportunity that they have to learn you just have to find the right platform to be able to sit down and talk to them about that, and to help them to look at the history carefully, and then getting to the part of what happened in the United States. The United States said, no, we don't need to do this. And, I think, we use the word parlance, but, the Tuskegee is in everybody's forefront. Henrietta Lacks is in everybody's forefront, and we understand that. And it's important for us to look at that. But there's a plethora of other issues and concerns. And there are concerns, I wouldn't say with such extensiveness, but there are concerns in my little world, of how research is taking place, and collection of data, and even consent processes and that sort of thing. So it's a great opportunity to do good things and to protect people. So.
And is there a difference when teaching bioethics if you're talking about, like, if you're teaching doctors to be working with children versus adults?
Yes, I think there is. This was a great question. I was at a symposium on Friday for our local organ donor people, the Midwest Transplant Network. And that question came up. Should there be a different process when we're talking to families about this wonderful option of helping people save lives and all through organ donation? I think you always have to have in the forefront. I mean, this is another lecture too, at another time, but the forefront of when you're working with children and getting into these deep and difficult, conflicted, rich, but cloudy and unclear situations, that there's always the element in every person of every culture that what's happening is not fair on an existential or a cosmic basis. And so you always have to leave time for that notion of why is this happening to this particular child? Why is it happening to an adult? Oftentimes adults will blame themselves. I did something in the past, and God is punishing me for this. And I think that is key to help people understand how to sit down and listen and empathize and communicate with families, especially in pediatrics.
Well, thank you for this and for helping us better understand how we can use these events in the past to help shape our research in the future. Thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. We have another program coming up on Tuesday, November 9th at 6:30. That's our annual Crystal Knot commemoration. It will be down at Union Station, and Lawrence Douglas will be talking to us. It's called From Nuremberg to Demonic Justice and the Trials of the Holocaust. So, another look at these post-war trials and how this continues to be an issue in our present. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. And I really appreciate this honor.
Good night.
Bye-bye.